The stars were silent, but silence in space often hides danger. Across the human colonies, whispers of fear began to spread. Ships vanished without reason. Outposts stopped sending messages. At first, people believed it was only accidents, mistakes, or broken machines, but deep inside, leaders knew something darker was coming. The Queen of Sol watched these events from her throne. She was young, but her eyes carried wisdom and weight. She ruled with calm hands, yet her heart was restless. Every night she read the reports, and every morning she asked the same question: why are my people dying, and who is behind this shadow? Her advisors laughed at the idea of a new enemy. They said humans had nothing to fear. They believed no power in the galaxy would dare attack them openly, but the Queen felt the truth pressing on her chest. The universe was never safe, and history had always shown that peace never lasts. One night, a survivor was found drifting in space, his ship broken, his body weak, his voice shaking. He told a story of ships that were not ships, creatures that fought like machines, but screamed like beasts. His words filled the halls with dread. The Queen listened in silence, but her mind was already racing. She understood what the others did not. This was not random. This was war beginning in the shadows. The enemy was testing them, watching them, preparing to strike. And if humanity did nothing, soon the darkness would fall on every world. The Queen stood before her council, her voice sharp like steel. She warned them that danger was close. She told them that humans must prepare. But the council ignored her. They thought her fear was weakness. They thought her vision was only a dream. Still, she did not give up. In her heart, she made a vow. If no one else would stand, she would stand. If no one else believed, she would believe. She would protect her people, even if it cost her crown. Meanwhile, the attacks grew bolder. A mining colony vanished overnight. An entire fleet failed to return. Families waited for fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters who never came back. Rumors spread faster than light. Some spoke of ghosts, others of monsters, but the Queen knew it was war. In the dark, she began to plan. She studied old battles, ancient tactics, forgotten strategies. She spoke to soldiers who had seen defeat and learned from their pain. She searched for new weapons, new ways, new hope. Her heart carried fear, but her mind carried fire. The people whispered about her. Some called her too young, too untested, but others began to see the spark in her eyes. They saw a leader who would not turn away, and in silence, hope began to rise. The enemy was still hidden. The council was still blind, but the Queen was awake, and in the shadows of war, a single choice was made, a choice that would change everything. She would not wait for the storm. She would become the storm. The Queen of Sol was not born into peace. Her childhood was filled with lessons of survival. She had seen hunger in the outer colonies. She had seen fear in the eyes of children when raiders came. She had felt the pain of people forgotten by their rulers. From a young age, she learned that power was not about crowns or thrones. Power was about responsibility. A true leader carried the weight of her people, not for glory, but for their future. This belief shaped her heart, and this heart would soon face its hardest test. She was different from rulers of the past. Where others loved gold, she loved books. Where others wanted endless feasts, she wanted endless knowledge. She spent long nights in the royal archives, reading about the first wars of Earth. She studied generals who had fought against stronger enemies and still found victory. She knew that history was not only memory, it was also a teacher. When the first attacks began, her council thought she would panic, but she did not. Her mind was calm, her voice steady, her eyes burning with quiet fire. The people began to notice her strength. Whispers of doubt slowly turned into whispers of faith. The Queen walked among her people often. She wore no crown in those moments. She spoke with farmers, with miners, with soldiers. She listened to their fears and gave them comfort. Her presence was like a flame in the dark. It told them that they were not forgotten, that someone still cared. One day, she visited a small military outpost. The soldiers were tired, their weapons old, their spirits low. Instead of giving a speech from her ship, she ate with them in their mess hall. She spoke to them as equals, not as a queen above them, and when she left, their eyes carried new strength. They began to believe that if she could fight, then so could they. But her road was not easy. The council continued to resist her warnings. They told her she was too young to understand war. They said humans should avoid conflict at all costs. They begged her to stay silent and leave the matters to generals. Yet deep inside, the Queen knew silence was death. She began to form her own circle, not of lords or merchants, but of thinkers, fighters, and dreamers. She gathered scientists who believed in impossible weapons. She gathered pilots who had survived hopeless battles. She gathered voices who wanted change. Together they became her hidden strength, a council of the future. As the enemy attacks grew louder, more people began to see the truth. The Queen had warned them long before. Her words now echoed like prophecy. She was no longer a ruler to be ignored. She was becoming a symbol, a figure who stood tall against the darkness. When others looked away, In the capital city, murals of her began to appear. Children played in the streets shouting her name as a hero. Songs were sung of her courage. Her image spread faster than fear, and soon, even her enemies would know her face. Yet the queen was still human. Late at night, she stood by her window, staring at the endless stars. Her people saw her as fearless, but she felt the weight of doubt. She asked herself if she was truly ready. She wondered if her choices would save her people or destroy them. But every morning, she placed the crown upon her head and walked forward, because even if she feared, she would not let her people fall. This was the rise of the queen, not of power, but of purpose, not of fear, but of faith, and her story was only beginning. The silence of space broke when the first strike came. It was not a warning, it was a storm. The enemy did not send messages. They did not demand surrender. They arrived with fire, with ships that glowed like shadows of death, and they struck fast. The first target was a mining colony on the edge of human space. Families lived there. Miners worked in the rocks of a barren world. One night their skies filled with lights, but they were not stars. They were burning ships falling apart. Cities turned to ash. When news reached the capital, fear spread like wildfire. The queen listened in silence, her face calm but her heart heavy. Her council shouted in panic. Some demanded peace, some demanded retreat, but she stood and spoke only one truth. This is war, and if we run, there will be nowhere left to hide. Her voice cut through their fear like a blade. For the first time, she called her people to arms. She sent messages across colonies and fleets, not words of despair, but words of courage. She told them that humanity had faced storms before, and that they would rise again. The generals doubted her, but the soldiers listened. They had seen her walk among them. They had heard her voice without fear. Now, when the darkness came, they were ready to follow her. She was not just a queen on a throne. She was becoming the heart of resistance. The enemy struck again, this time at a convoy of supply ships. But the queen had prepared. She ordered small patrols to guard the routes. When the enemy appeared, the patrols fought back with everything they had. The battle was brutal. The humans were outnumbered, but they fought like fire. In the middle of the chaos, the queen watched from her command center. She listened to every cry, every report, every explosion. Her hands shook for a moment, but she clenched them into fists. This was the test she had prepared for. This was the mota, meant where fear must bow to courage. The first battles were not victories, but they were not defeats either. Humans lost ships, but they proved something greater. They proved they could fight back. They proved the enemy was not unstoppable. And for the first time, the enemy began to notice the queen. She ordered a bold move, a strike deep into enemy-controlled space. Her advisors called her reckless. Her council called her foolish. But she said only this: if we always wait, we will always lose. The mission began with silence. Human ships moved through the void like hunters. They found an enemy base hidden among the asteroids. With speed and fury, they attacked. The battle shook the stars. Fire filled the dark. The humans destroyed the base, but the cost was heavy. Brave pilots never returned. Soldiers gave their last breath. The queen stood before the families of the fallen. She did not speak of glory. She spoke of sacrifice. She told them their loved ones had lit a fire that would never die. The galaxy began to whisper. The humans had struck back. The Queen of Sol was no longer a shadow in the background. She was a force, a leader who dared to fight. And from this first strike, the war truly began. But deep inside, she knew the enemy was only testing her. This was not their full strength. The storm ahead would be greater, and the question was no longer if she could fight. The question was if she could win. The war had begun, but the enemy was still stronger. Human fleets were smaller, their weapons weaker, their numbers fewer. Every battle was a storm of fire, and every victory was paid in blood. Yet in the middle of this darkness, the Queen of Sol refused to break. She studied the enemy with sharp eyes. She noticed their ships moved with patterns, like a rhythm. They fought with great power, but they lacked imagination. They were fast, but not flexible. Strong, but not creative. The queen saw what others did not. She realized that the mind of a human was the greatest weapon of all. While her council begged for peace, she began to build new plans. She called scientists and engineers to her side. She told them to forget old rules, to dream of new weapons. She spoke to pilots who had fought and survived impossible battles. She asked them to teach her how they won when they should have lost. Slowly, she built a new kind of war. Her strategies were not about strength alone. They were about speed, about trickery, about using the smallest force in the sharpest way. She ordered fleets to split into small groups. She told them to strike from shadows, then vanish before the enemy could respond. She turned weakness into strength, and strength into surprise. The first time she used her plan, the enemy was caught unprepared. They entered a system expecting to crush another colony, but instead, small human ships swarmed them like wasps. They hit from every angle, then disappeared into the dark. The enemy ships were powerful, but they could not fight shadows. By the end of the battle, the humans stood victorious. The Queen's strategy had worked. News of the victory spread fast. Across the colonies, people lifted their heads with pride. For the first time, they believed the war could be won. For the first time, the Queen's name was spoken with hope instead of doubt. But victory came with a price. Her enemies within the council began to fear her rise. They whispered behind closed doors that she was dangerous, that she was leading humans into destruction. Yet the people no longer listened to the council. They listened to their queen. The enemy too began to notice. Reports reached their commanders of a human leader who turned weakness into strength. They gave her a name in their language, a name that meant the Storm Queen. They realized she was no ordinary ruler, and they began to hunt her with growing fury. The queen knew the danger, but she did not step back. She moved among her soldiers. She listened to their stories. She told them they were the shield of humanity, and they believed her words. When she spoke, her voice carried not as a ruler above them, but as a fighter among them. Battle after battle, her new strategies turned the tide. Where humans once only survived, now they struck with fire. Where they once feared, now they roared. The queen had given them more than plans. She had given them belief, but she also knew the war was far from over. The enemy was adapting, growing sharper with each clash. She could feel the storm rising, a storm greater than any before. Still, she stood tall and whispered to herself, if they adapt, then we will adapt faster. This was the turning point, the moment when fear began to fade, the moment when humanity stopped running and started fighting. The queen had lit a fire in the dark, and that fire was spreading across the stars. The victories of the queen lit the galaxy with hope, but hope was never free. Every battle she won demanded a price. Every victory was painted with the blood of her people. The enemy grew stronger. They studied her tactics. They began to copy her speed. Their ships moved faster, their strikes sharper. The queen knew this moment would come. No plan worked forever. No weapon stayed hidden for long. One night, she stood in the war room, maps glowing before her eyes, lines of red spread across human space. Each line was a wound, each star a scar. Her generals argued, her council shouted. Some demanded retreat, others demanded surrender. But the queen said nothing. She only stared at the stars and thought of her people. Then came the darkest day. The enemy struck at a world deep inside human territory, a world filled with families, schools, and markets. The queen sent fleets to defend it, but the enemy was already there with numbers too great. The battle raged for hours. In the end, the planet burned. Millions were lost. Even with her courage, the queen could not save them all. The cries of the people echoed across the galaxy. They asked why their queen had failed. They asked if hope was only an illusion, and the queen felt the weight of their pain on her shoulders. She did not hide from them. She walked among the ruins. She touched the ashes with her hands. She spoke to the families of the fallen. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, but her voice did not break. She told them that their loss would not be in vain, that their loved ones had bought time for humanity to rise again. Yet inside, the queen carried a wound no one could see. She wondered if she was truly strong enough. She wondered if every choice she made only brought more death. But even as doubt whispered, she refused to stop, because she knew if she gave in, all would be lost. Her enemies saw her struggle and tried to break her spirit. They sent messages filled with threats. They told her surrender would save lives. They promised mercy if she laid down her crown. But she tore the messages apart. Her answer was silence. Her answer was resistance. Still, the cost grew heavier. Resources ran low. Weapons failed. Soldiers grew tired. Some leaders abandoned the fight. Some worlds turned their backs on the queen. But even in betrayal, she stood firm. Her fire did not fade, even when surrounded by shadows. One night, in the quiet of her chamber, she made a choice. She sent her own family away to a hidden world. She told them they could not stay close to her. She could not protect them and protect humanity at the same time. Her heart broke as she watched them leave, but this was her sacrifice. A crown was not only power, it was also loneliness. Her soldiers saw her pain, but instead of weakness, they saw strength. They saw a leader who gave everything for them, and their loyalty grew unshakable. They swore to fight until the end, not for themselves, but for her. The queen knew the struggle was far from over. She knew more losses would come, but she also knew one truth. As long as she stood, humanity would stand. Her sacrifice was not the end. It was only the beginning of the storm to come. The stars grew darker as the enemy gathered their full strength. Across the galaxy, their fleets formed like a sea of fire. World after world fell silent. Their banners turned to ash. It was clear to all that the final battle was near. The queen stood at the center of it all. Her eyes carried the weight of every loss, every sacrifice. Her body was tired, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. She knew this was the moment that would decide everything, not only for her people, but for the future of humanity itself. She called her soldiers together. In halls filled with the hum of engines and the smell of steel, she spoke. She told them that this was not only a fight for survival, it was a fight for memory, for family, for every child waiting on a distant world. Her voice was steady, her words simple. "We are the line between darkness and dawn," she said, and her soldiers roared in answer. The battle began at the edge of a dying star. The enemy came with thousands of ships, their shadows covering the light. The Queen's fleets were fewer, but they moved with speed and fire. Every pilot, every gunner, every captain fought as if tomorrow would never come. The stars themselves seemed to shake with the clash. The enemy believed their numbers would crush humanity. But the Queen had planned for this. She had studied their patterns, their habits, their pride. She set traps among the asteroids. She hid fleets in the dark, waiting like hunters. When the enemy pushed forward, she struck from every side. The void lit up with explosions. Still, the battle was not easy. Human ships burned. Brave soldiers fell. The Queen watched the losses with a heavy heart, but she did not falter. Her voice rang through the command channels. "Hold the line. Do not break. Today, we write the future." At the center of the fight, the enemy flagship appeared. A monster of metal, larger than any HFY human ship. It tore through defenses, scattering fleets like dust. The Queen knew this was the heart of their power. If it lived, the war would never end. She made a choice. She left the safety of the command station and stepped into her own ship. Her generals begged her to stay, but she only said, "A leader must stand where the fire is hottest." Her ship launched into the chaos, its engines screaming against the void. The final clash was a storm of fire. Her ship darted between the enemy's guns, weaving through death itself. Her pilots followed, their loyalty unshaken. Together they struck at the flagship. Weapons thundered, shields shattered, hulls cracked. The enemy ship roared like a beast refusing to die. At last, the Queen gave the final command. Her fleet poured all fire into the enemy's core. The void exploded in light, brighter than a sun. The flagship was torn apart, its pieces falling into the darkness. Silence followed. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then the enemy ships began to scatter, their courage broken. The humans had done the impossible. The Queen had led them to victory. But the cost was heavy. Many ships did not return. Many voices were lost. The Queen stood in her silent cabin, eyes closed, heart heavy. She whispered the names of the fallen and promised their sacrifice would never be forgotten. The final battle was over. The war was not the same. The galaxy would never be the same. And the Queen of Sol had become more than a ruler. She had become a legend. The war was over, but the silence felt strange. The stars, once filled with fire, now looked calm again. Burned ships floated like ghosts in the dark. Planets began to breathe again, and broken cities started to rise. But behind the silence, there was still pain. So much had been lost. So many hearts were empty. And in the center of it all stood the Queen of Sol. She had led her people through the fire. She had faced fear, betrayal, and death. She had watched friends fall and dreams break, but she had never turned away. Now, with victory in hand, the galaxy looked to her. They waited to see what kind of queen she would be after the war. Would she take power for herself or give it back to the people? Would she become a ruler of iron or a leader of hope? She stepped onto the grand stage of the capital. The crowd stood in silence. Thousands of voices held back. Everyone watched as she raised her hand, and when she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it carried through every soul. She spoke of unity. She spoke of the price they had paid. She reminded them that humans had survived not because they were stronger, but because they were willing to stand for each other, to fight not just for Earth, but for all worlds under their name. She did not speak of revenge. She spoke of rebuilding, of peace. She opened her hand to former enemies and offered them a place at the table. She said, "If we build walls, the war will return. But if we build bridges, the future will be ours." The people wept. They wept for what they had lost and for what they could now become. The Queen had not only saved them from the enemy, she had saved them from becoming monsters themselves. Across the stars, statues were raised in her honor. Children learned her name in schools. Songs were written. Planets were renamed. But the Queen did not want glory. She wanted healing. She visited the worlds that had suffered the most. She walked the streets without guards, without gold. She knelt beside the wounded and the poor. She listened to stories of loss and gave comfort with her presence. Her enemies, once filled with hatred, began to respect her. They saw her not as a conqueror, but as a bringer of balance. Even those who once fought her began to follow her vision. The Queen changed everything, not just with war, but with wisdom, not just with weapons, but with words. She taught humanity that true strength was not power, it was mercy, courage, and the will to rise after falling. Years passed, and the galaxy slowly healed. Trade returned, science grew, peace held, and in quiet halls, young leaders studied her choices. They asked, what would the Queen of Sol do? Her name became a guide, not just a memory, and when the queen grew old, she stepped down. She gave her crown to a new generation. She did not fear the future because she had built it with her own hands. In her final days, she sat alone under the stars. She smiled, not because the road was easy, but because it had been worth it. The galaxy had changed, and she had been the reason.